Hi, I'm Daisy Wymark, and I'm currently in my third year studying Japanese at the University of Oxford. So that meant that last year I was lucky enough to spend a year abroad living and studying in Japan. One of the things that I did whilst I was there was to talk to and to interview some Japanese and international students about their involvement and interest in politics. What those discussions and those interviews highlighted for me is that sometimes young people, we can feel that we don't know enough about current affairs to get involved, and it can sometimes feel tricky to find stories that are easily accessible for us. One of the things that I really like about this project with Art for Refugees is that it's a chance to learn about, as well as to share those stories that we might not hear about otherwise. So it's a really great way of raising awareness about some very important issues. Personally, at least, I didn't know very much at all about the conflict in Cyprus or the UN Buffer Zone on the island before I took part in this project. I had heard little bits from a neighbour who's a Cypriot, as well as from friends whose parents had been posted there with the British Army in Cyprus. But apart from that, it just wasn't something that was really on my radar much. It wasn't something I was really aware of much. I wasn't aware of it featuring much on TV, apart from a recent programme with Ben Fogle, which looked at deserted properties in what is now known as the Green Line, or Buffer Zone. But this project has encouraged me to learn more about the wider context of the situation and how this continues to affect ordinary people's lives. And even people such as myself, who are lucky enough not to have been refugees, we can still empathise with the challenges faced by refugees from a human perspective. I think that highlighting the human elements of these stories is especially important because the political rights and wrongs are often complex with grey and nuanced elements, which many of us can sometimes struggle to relate to. And it seems that empathising with a human being, whether from the north or the south of whatever country, is much easier. So here's just a brief summary of some of the things that I've learned about Cyprus and the conflict. So Cyprus gained independence from Britain in 1950. Communities of Christians and Muslims lived across the island. Tensions developed and grew into violence, with many Turkish Muslims moving to the north and creating Turkish Cypriot enclaves protected by the Turkish army, and many Greek Christians moved to the south. A buffer zone was created by the UN in 1964 to separate the north and the south, which was extended multiple times until 1974, where it has remained since. Various efforts have been made to reduce tensions and to create a lasting peace, but it has proved to be a difficult and slow process. In 2003, people began to cross the border, and since then, more links, more connections have developed. In Pilar, one of the few villages within the UN buffer zone and the only bi-communal village after 1974, is where the Pilar Peace Festival has taken place multiple times. It celebrates the coexistence and the cultures of both communities. However, visits across the border have also brought painful memories for those, for example, visiting childhood homes. One elderly lady visited the house that she fled in 1974, and the occupants were still using her furniture and even the silver set that she'd received as a wedding present. The legacy still also presents practical as well as emotional challenges. For example, some Turkish Cypriots are also still struggling to get citizen documents, including things like passports, because the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus is only recognised by Turkey, but not internationally. It is often considered a frozen conflict. So, in international relations, a frozen conflict is a situation where the active armed fighting has ended, but no clear peace treaty or other political framework is there to resolve the conflict in a way that satisfies the combatants. And understanding a bit more about the ongoing so-called frozen nature of the conflict and how it continues to affect people's lives is really important. And the Cyprus conflict is just one of so many conflicts around the world, which are often not in the mainstream consciousness of those not directly affected. I found researching it really interesting, and for me at least, learning about the human stories behind the statistics or the data or broader political considerations brought the realities of being a refugee into much sharper focus. It's also encouraged me to educate myself more about the experiences of refugees and conflicts and post-conflict regions, which I didn't learn about in school, or which don't necessarily receive as much attention in mainstream media. I think that the Art for Refugees Hub provides a really useful starting point, and it helps to make some of these issues and stories a bit more accessible to Gen Zs like myself. Finally, just in terms of some of the skills that this internship has helped me to develop, I'd say that one of the main ones is adapting my writing style. I'm personally used to writing in a more academic style, so trying a more journalistic approach has been great practice, and it's a skill that I hope to practice more in the future too. So overall, I'd say that I found working on this project so valuable, and I really hope that you learn something from the articles and that you find them interesting. Thank you so much for listening.